gangs. And so there was a reputation that Chicago had so far as guns and violence, gangsters, that type of thing. I would like to fast forward now to the year 2013. City of Chicago, the south and the west side of Chicago. Chicago has been rated by the FBI the #1 murder capital of the United States, surpassing Los Angeles as well as New York. And both of those cities have a larger population than Chicago. The gun culture that I spoke of in Chicago, I believe is not just something unique to Chicago. I believe that the gun culture is an American culture. In Chicago, Chicago is unique in the sense that, unlike Columbine and other shootings and everything that have taken place, these mass shootings that have taken place, in Chicago, there's a problem with illegal guns. Most of the guns on the streets of Chicago, they are illegal handguns. Also, the guns in Chicago that's tied to a lot of the murders, they're tied to the various gangs, and the gangs are dealing drugs. And so when you look at the guns there in Chicago, when you look at the murder rate, then they're tied to the warring gang factions that's there. And the gangs are dealing drugs to get money. And so there's an economic component that's there. So if we would address the economic problem that exists there, I believe that we can solve the gun problem and the murder problem that exists there in Chicago, because in a lot of these areas where you have the gangs, then there's low unemployment, there's no economic opportunities. So if we can address the economic opportunities, then I believe that we can solve the murder rate, we can bring it down, and we can solve a lot of the problems that exist there in Chicago. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our final speaker for the evening, Lieutenant Brad Ory. Lieutenant Ory. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Like you said, I'm Brad Ware. I'm a lieutenant of the Charleston Police Department. I've been in law enforcement for 25 years. I grew up around here, grew up over in Shelby County, a town of about 450 people. And like this gentleman, I used to get toy guns for Christmas also, and played with them, had a great time. Also, I will say, I'm a firearms instructor. I'm a lifelong gun owner. I say life, my adult life anyway. I shoot recreationally. I hunt. My whole family hunts. And I had my stepson shooting a gun when he was probably old enough to hold it. Probably by 6 or 7, he was shooting. In Kings County, there's probably more guns than people. I guess as a law enforcement officer, I don't feel as though every time I've shown up for work, my life is in danger by firearms. Most of the firearms are carried by very law-abiding citizens and are handled very well. But like he said, there's a lot of illegal guns out there also. But in this area, we haven't seen outbreaks of gun violence. It happens every once in a while. There's a lot of police officers in the audience right now, or former police officers, and I think they would agree with me with that also. It is a very different culture. We have a constitutionally guaranteed right to bear arms, and I'm an advocate of that, but I'm also an advocate of responsible behavior as well. with rights come responsibilities, and people's personal behaviors count. And if you're going to own and carry a gun, you're going to have to be responsible with it. If not, there's going to be fines and penalties for that. But I would rather have that than not have the right to bear arms.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Orion. Before we open it up for questions, I would guess that there's going to be a large number of questions from the audience. There's a couple things that I would like, just the sort of moderator's prerogative. If there are students that have questions, I want to be able to recognize as many students as possible. And of course, anyone else that has questions, we want to try to do our best to get everyone in. One of the things that's very important, as instructor's prerogative, if some of my students sneak out early, I will see you. One of the things that I think each of the four speakers spoke to was the idea that guns don't exist in a vacuum. There's a culture. And so what happens in Germany as is framed by post-World War II laws that come into effect, it directly affects ultimately what German laws for guns look like today. The same, I believe, can be argued about the United States, sort of post-Revolutionary War, as the Constitution was written, as the Bill of Rights are added to the Constitution after it's adopted in as it's being adopted in 1789, excuse me. That set a tone, and so much of what happens in the United States ultimately sort of frames the way that we think about guns. I will add just a brief sort of personal a moment to this. I grew up down south. I grew up in Arkansas. I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas. And in Arkansas, Arkansas is a primarily rural state with a few sort of urban areas, but guns were sort of a kind of background thing. I mean, I knew people when I was growing up who would get out of school to go deer hunting or go duck hunting. My uncles owned guns. I was around them. So there was never this sort of question of guns, guns yes or guns no. They were just sort of there, this background. You never sort of questioned it. But that, growing up in that culture, it affected the way I saw it. And so one of the things that I think we'll probably get to are not just how these cultures affect our attitudes toward guns, but what are our consequences of those attitudes and of the laws that we have, both from the German perspective and from the American perspective. The fact that we do have the Second Amendment, the fact that we have had debates and things like that, has that affected the way that we view them? Has that affected the way that we look at if we're going to regulate, how we're going to regulate? All of these things are sort of a consequence of this. So at this time, what I'd like to do is, if any of the panelists would like to respond to something they've heard, I'd like to give them the opportunity to do that. And again, if anyone has questions, we have a gentleman who has a microphone. And so we can bring, if you raise your hand, the gentleman will be on the lookout. We can bring the microphone to you. If you'd like to address the question to the panel at large, you can do that. If you'd like to address your question to any individual member of the panel, you can do that as well. So at this time, is there anything that the panelists would like to respond to, or can we move directly into questions from the audience? All right. So I believe we are moving directly to questions from the audience. And again, I'm assuming everybody doesn't have quite as big a mouth as I do, so if you don't mind, just wait until you're recognized and we'll get the microphone to you as quickly as possible. I believe this gentleman has a question.
Yes, I believe that the gun control laws started earlier than what you were saying. After World War II is what you said, but what I've been told is that the Nazis disarmed Jews and other minorities before World War II even started. And how do you feel that worked out for them?
Ja, schwierige Frage jetzt zu beantworten. Sorry, I think it's a very easy answer because I think 90% of Germany were fascists or were members of the fascist party. And I think the idea that the Jews had a better chance if they were armed, I think this is not the point of view. Because now I think that I think that there won't be any or I think if they had arms, because there was such a minority, there was a Jewish minority against the fascist majority, and no way. I wish that the Jews had guns, of course, but it hasn't changed the situation. Warschauer Ghetto, there was it's a very special team for us Germans.
There was the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto. There were armed Jewish people in the Warsaw Ghetto who made a stand in 44. They were heroes, but they were, of course, pretty much wiped out.
German people themselves, if they had had guns, they might have killed some of those Nazis. Some good Germans.
Kann es nicht sagen, dass die Nazis glauben und die Deutschen glauben. Das ist eine andere Diskussion.
That's another discussion, he says, because the current German laws are not derived from the National Socialist government. They are derived from the government that arose out of the occupation after the war. That was his point.
Grüß Gott, guten Abend, mein deutscher Kameraden. Erster, ich spreche mit der Polizeihauptmann. Herr Hauptmann, ich bin ein Ausländer, amerikanisch. Ich bin ein Deutscher. Ich wohne und arbeite in Deutschland für 3,5 Jahre mit amerikanischen Forces, mit GSRG, Bundesgrundschutz 9 in 79, and now I'll speak English. So you know my background, and I'm going to explain, and I have two questions. First to you, Hauptmann, Herr Hauptmann, the captain, and then to our activists from Chicago, community activists in Chicago. I'll tell you my first experience in Germany. When I went to pick up my vehicle in Bremerhaven, I was in Germany a couple weeks and with a good friend of mine. And later I worked with the counter-terrorist group, Bundesgrenzschutz 9, as adult operators later on. But I was going down to Munich a couple weeks later, and I was pulled off the highway on the Autobahn in 1979 by 3 uniformed Polizei with submachine guns. And they went around to the vehicle. My friend was actually driving his vehicle. And they went around the vehicle, they went around the vehicle to let him know he left his signal light on too long. That is Deutschland. Bitte? Du sprechen Erste. This is the United States of America, and I know that your personal liberties have gotten lessened in my time. I'm a retired command sergeant major from the Army. I'm going to talk about this I have a radio show in Effingham out of Cromwell Broadcasting, Guns Today. And we're about the Second Amendment, guns, hunting, the shooting sports industry, with an overall theme of a government responsible to we the people. It's a little bit conservative. One of the things that I'm going to talk about tonight, I also am a recruiter for the NRA. I'm a benefactor member of the NRA. I'm on the Gun Safe Flag Board here in Illinois, civil rights group for the whole Constitution, the Bill of Rights, which Germany doesn't have a Bill of Rights like us. So one of my points is, from an I2 professor, thanks for the opportunity, because I too have a degree from political science and American government before I was an instructor at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. So one of the things I'd like to say is, we appreciate you being our guests, and whether it be pre-war or post-war Germany, and all due respect to our Deutscher comrades, we've got very little in this country to learn from Germany, except maybe what not to do. And I do respect you being here, and I do understand that. And this is now, but you are a socialist state, and although as a job as a police officer, you stated you might be a little less tense. Well, you know what? Our police officers might be a little more tense, but as freedom-loving citizens, we're less tense when we have those Bill of Rights. Next, to our... Yes, sprechen Sie?
Ja, haben Sie eine Frage? This one statement, but not a question.
Actually, you know what? I actually don't think we need to have a question for that. Sorry if that was a statement. I do have a question then for the gentleman from Chicago. We're glad you're down here. You mentioned that there's gun violence in Chicago. You know, I've never seen an inanimate object or a tool or a gun commit violence. But what you do have is you have criminal and gang violence. And you mentioned you have a gun culture. No, you have a criminal and a thug culture. We kind of have a gun culture down here in this part of the state and other places in the whole country, except we don't shoot our butts off. And we have a real gun culture, and we're responsible, and we follow the rules and the laws. And you've got a police commissioner up there, and I've talked about him on my radio show back in January, kind of a lackey, or your mayor. And Police Commissioner McCarthy, you know, he started making not even veiled threats to law-abiding citizens when concealed carry was coming. The law which we have now, which I trained 50 people this weekend at my own All-American gun site near here.
Ask the question.
Okay, here's your question. Why do you call what you have in Chicago gun culture instead of gun violence? Why do you call it a culture? It's you call it gun violence. It's criminal violence. Why don't you call it what it is? Just say, why don't you call it what it is? It's criminal violence, and the laws aren't enforced.
Well, I don't know if it's a gun culture or criminal violence, but people are dying on the streets up there every day, and I'm here to try to get some answers and everything. Basically, my point of view is that basically the guns up there are illegal guns, and it's tied to the drug trade, and if there was more economic development, job opportunities, then we could eliminate the problem.
He's a little bit surprised at the emotional heat that this issue brings. You were threatened in 1979 at a traffic stop in Germany. It was a very bad time because they were fighting against terrorism.
Der Weigermeinhof gun.
Right.
Yeah.
Bademann.
Okay, Bademann, yeah. RAF, bis Mitte der 80er Jahre.
Till the middle of the 1980s.
Und genau da hat es mit diesem Klima, dass wir bei jeder Kontrolle damit rechnen mussten, jemand hat eine Waffe im Hintergrund.
Right. Until then, there was this idea that
Dieses Klima der Angst bei der
there was
Kontrolle.
this theme of fear with a stop because of terrorism that was in Germany at the time.
Ich möchte noch einmal betonen, wir sind hier nicht da, um irgendwas zu bewerten. Wir sind eine komplett verschiedene Kultur. Die amerikanische und die deutsche waren.
He's not here to judge American culture. He's only here to discuss the differences between gun cultures in Germany and the United States.
Wir leben mit unserer Kultur recht gut.
And they live with their own culture very well.
A question by the young man.
So thank you for being here. You guys flew over to see the long way. I hate flying. That's very good. Thank you. Mr. Muhammad, thanks for being here. I'm from Chicago as well. I'm not from any housing project. Thank you for your service here. I live in Charleston. I look for you guys to check me because I don't have enough. And for you two gentlemen from Munich, what you guys have said sounds really good to me. There's not much anguish, it sounds like. When you come here, would you, this is not too hard, would you want your family to live here? And if you could bring them here, would you?
America is a great country. First of all, I love America, and I visit America sehr gerne. Every visit was great for me. But for example, I lived in Munich. In a part of Munich, we have more crime. Upella, the name is Upella, and I went with my family to a smaller village nearby Munich because my child are more. I have more secure for my child. That's a reason, and all parents of the world want security for his child. I think it's the most important thing I can give my love and security I can give my child. And so I don't know, is it answer enough for you? But you have a great country. No problem. I don't have any problems with the United States. But for my child, I will do the best.
Well, yeah, I would say the same. I would take my family here, but I think perhaps we can talk about the food. But I think one theme is what do we need to live safe? What do we need? Do we need to have or to keep guns to live safe here or not? And for me it was very interesting. Last week I visited the Porsche family. You perhaps heard about this car, Porsche, I don't know. And this family is looking for more protection. And I was there with some colleagues, and we told them, yeah, you can make this in your garden, and we can give you some shooting training or whatever. But then we realized that becomes to a factor, then more protection means less freedom. If I think there is always dangerous around me, there's always a risk for me, I think, then I lose my freedom, because then I'm starting to get paranoid. So I think, as a person from the German culture, there is always a risk. We cannot protect every pupil against school shooting. There is no way. So the question for me is, with how many risks I can live, and on one hand, will I always look to, I need this protection, I need the gun, I need this security on one hand, and then I have always looking over what's going on. Or on the other hand, can I keep alive without all this paranoid thinking? And I think the question is, means more weapons, does it mean more safeness or not? Make weapons the world more safe for the society? I think this is the question.
This